Okay, welcome back. This is part 3, the last part. Here we're going to get into some real nitty-gritty puzzle construction and design stuff. So, this is the meat of the talk, really. Lesson number 21 is speak playfully to the solver. And to illustrate this, I want to show you an Akari puzzle. Akari is a puzzle type where you're given a grid. It's a logic puzzle, and there's some cells that have different numbers in them. And the goal is to place light bulbs in the grid in some of the empty cells. And there are 3 rules. One is that the lights shine horizontally and vertically, and your goal is to cover the whole grid, to illuminate the whole grid using lights. However, there are 2 constraints. One is 2 lights are not allowed to illuminate each other. And the second is that the numbers on the grid tell you the number of lights adjacent to that number in the sort of north, south, east, west directions. So a 2, for example, like this one, has 2 lights next to it, here and here. And this 1 has 1 light next to it there, and so on. That's it. So I want to show you the solution to this puzzle, and we will observe some remarkable things. So this is a site called Puzzlelink where you can play a lot of these types of logic puzzles. And we'll take you through the solution. At first, actually, this is a somewhat difficult puzzle. This is not necessarily a completely beginner-level puzzle. At first, you may not find any immediate location to make progress, but one thing to look at is this 1 in the corner. And so we know that there's either a light bulb here or here, but we don't know which of those 2 it is yet. However, one thing we can deduce is that there cannot be a light bulb here, because if there was a light bulb here, then both this cell and that cell would be ruled out from having a light bulb, because 2 light bulbs cannot illuminate each other. Therefore, there can't be a light bulb here. And so using a dot, we can mark this cell as a cell that doesn't have a light bulb. Another way of seeing this is that if there was a light bulb there, or a light bulb there, in both cases, this cell is ruled out from containing a light bulb. Therefore, in both cases, there's no light bulb here. We can make similar progress by looking at this 2 here. There's sort of 3 candidate locations where a light bulb could be, but only 2 of them will contain light bulbs. However, we can deduce that this cell right here cannot contain a light bulb. Otherwise, there would only be 1 other space left adjacent to this 2, because these 2 cells would both be ruled out. Therefore, there cannot be a light bulb here. And so knowing that these 2 cells cannot be light bulbs allows us to make additional progress. If we look at this 2 right down here, we may also deduce that this cell can't be a light bulb, because again it would rule out 2 possible locations of the 3 that could be light bulbs. Therefore, there's no light bulb there. Similarly, there's no light bulb here, because it would rule out those 2 cells, leaving only 1 place remaining for another light bulb adjacent to this 2. So there's no light bulb there. And now we can look at this 1 and do similar logic. There can't be a light bulb here because it would rule out both of these. Therefore, that's not a light bulb. And that chains into the next 2. And now we can't have a light bulb here or here, because they would both rule out too many locations. And using the same type of chaining logic, we can see on this 2, there can't be light bulbs here and there. And then this dot implies that for this 1, there can't be a light bulb there. And then this 2 is then implied that there are no light bulbs here or here. And now on this one, we can learn that there's no light bulb here. And on this one, we can learn that there's no light bulb here, because again, it would rule out all the possible locations where a light bulb could be. And then these 2 dots together imply that we can't have a light bulb here, because it would rule out the only remaining locations next to this 1. And the chaining keeps going. This 2 rules out that. This 2 rules out these 2. That 1 is now ruled out from here. This dot that we did earlier also rules out this side. And now, finally, after all that setup, after all that work, we finally have this 1 over here where both sides of it have been ruled out, and we can finally place our first light bulb in the puzzle. And after that, placing that light bulb in the puzzle, we can place the light bulb next to this 1. We can place the 2 light bulbs next to this 2, which then allow us to place the 2 light bulbs next to this 2, which allow us to place the light bulb next to this 1. And then these 2, and then this 1, and then these 2, and these 2, and this 1, and these 2. And it just keeps going until we place the last 2 next to these. And to finish the puzzle, there is 1 square remaining that hasn't been illuminated, and of course we have to put the final light bulb there. And that is the solution to this Akari puzzle. And there are so many things about this puzzle that are remarkable. There's this whole sense of playfulness as you're going through the puzzle and taking these steps, one leading to the next, leading to the next. There's this repeated pattern or motif where you're using the same lemma or the same pattern or technique over and over again to create this chain repetition of logic. And then there's a variant or a twist on that lemma where, you're using it once and then a second time on the same thing. And there's the whole setup and payoff. Like you do one lap around the grid to rule out one set of spaces, and then you do a second lap which rules out a second set of spaces and then results in the final placement of the light bulbs. The whole surprise ending where there's only one space left is sort of a cherry on top. But, you look at a puzzle like this and there can be no doubt that it was created by a human. This puzzle is just like, mwah. It's beautiful. There's some steps of how it's created that feel a little bit similar to sort of the Nintendo 4-step level design where you have something new and then you sort of introduce it and then create a twist on it and then, put it together into a finale. And then, you might throw away this idea for your next puzzle. But there's something special going on here, and it makes the experience of solving this puzzle more than just one of finding the answer to something. It's like communicating with the author of this puzzle. And I'll share with you a quote from Nobuhiko Kanemoto, who was the editor of Nikoli. And this is way back. This is 2 decades ago, before Sudoku took over in the West. This is when Sudoku that was computer generated was just starting to come out. And Kanemoto-san remarks that computer-generated Sudoku puzzles are sort of lacking that vital ingredient that makes puzzles enjoyable, this sense of communication. And, what ended up happening was these sort of massive numbers of computer-generated Sudoku puzzles flooded the newspapers in the West and the puzzle books in the West. And as a result, subscribers of Nikoli and other Japanese puzzle magazines, they had this sort of taste for handcrafted puzzles. But folks in the West never developed that taste. They were just bombarded with computer-generated puzzles, which is sort of a tragedy in some ways, because the subtlety and excitement of really good Sudoku puzzles or other paper-based logic puzzles has been lost. And a lot of people think of Sudoku as sort of a tired, boring, not that interesting, not that novel puzzle. But there are good Sudokus. This is a book by Thomas Snyder called The Art of Sudoku. And it's just one of many examples. But the puzzles in this book, they're not only artfully designed and laid out, but they also have this sort of flow between the puzzle maker and solver where you're taken on a journey from starting the puzzle to the end, where more and more things are revealed to you. And if you've never done a good Sudoku puzzle, I would highly recommend you actually try them. Better yet, go on Cracking the Cryptics YouTube channel and look at some of the more interesting Sudokus that they've done and give them a try yourself. But the question is, how do you design puzzles like that? And there is a trick. There is a technique that allows us to do that. And it's, the technique is called designing from the front, or aka forward design. And I will show you a demo of this. And we're going to open up the creator for these types of puzzles. And I'm literally YOLOing it. Like, when I did the recording of the GDC talk, I sort of had a plan of what I'm going to do. But here, I'm literally just going to make it up as I go. And so we're creating an Akari puzzle. Let's make a low difficulty one and insert lots of easy steps. Something we might do is let's put in a 0. A 0 is sort of an obvious place to get started. It's a so-called hook. It's a thing that the player will immediately take their pencil and put in something. And let me just zoom out a tick. The method that we're using here is we're going to place clues and solve the puzzle at the same time. And we're going to place clues in the order that the player would sort of notice them as they were solving the puzzle. So we flip into answer mode, and then in answer mode, we'll mark these 2 cells as cells that the solver will know are not light bulbs. And then we'll go back into edit mode, and let's just add some more stuff. Let's try putting a 2 here. Right, and then we'll go into answer mode, and the solver will realize, okay, well, after the 0 goes there, then we have to put 2 light bulbs there. Let's go back into edit mode. Let's try putting some walls here and here. This will create a situation where that cell needs to be lit by a light bulb, but the only possible location of a light bulb to light it up will be here, because anywhere else, we can't put a light bulb there. So then we go back to answer mode and we stick a light bulb there. Let's see what else. Let's try putting a wall here, and maybe these two light bulbs, we want them to infer together the next step. And let's try putting a 2 here. And then our solver, upon sort of seeing the top and bottom of this 2 have been ruled out, can put 2 more light bulbs there and there. Okay, pretty good. Now we're going to have to make sure, like, we can't put a block there, otherwise it will have invalidated that part of the solution. So we kind of have to keep in mind what are the bits that are required to sort of make the puzzle that we've done so far work. But, if we feel that the lights are shining too far and we need to add more obstacles, we could add some obstacles on this side, let's say. I'm not sure what we're going to do there. Maybe, well, let's see. We could try putting a 1 here, and that will allow us to rule out these 2 cells now that we've put 1 there. Can that do something interesting? Well, we could maybe put a block there, and then we know a light bulb has to go in the corner. Sure, let's do that, because that, these 2 cells both have to be lit up, but we can't put 1 there. Maybe this could also reveal something to us. Let's try something a little more sophisticated here. Let's copy the trick from that previous Akari puzzle, whereby, because one side of this 2 has been blocked, we know that this can't be a light bulb and this can't be a light bulb, because either of these would rule out too many spots and the 2 would only have 1 location left. So let's try that. And then we learn that these are not light bulbs. Let's try, well, we could try putting a 2 there, and then we'll place those 2 there, which then feed back into the 2 that we were just in and give us 2 light bulbs there and there. Lovely. What now? And you can see how this just flows. Like, I'm literally just making this up as I go. I do not have a plan. Maybe I could have a plan, and I could try to make a puzzle that has a certain pattern or goes around the grid in a certain way. Like, maybe I want the flow to kind of go in a circle and come into the middle. That can be a nice motif. Let's try doing that. So let's make it so this one kind of goes up and gives us some logic in the upward direction. Like, maybe this one and this one can combine, and we can have... let's try and think. Let's put a number there, maybe. Maybe a 1. And maybe all 3 of these combine to force a light bulb in the upward direction there. Whoops. Answer mode. Boom. And now this will sort of push logic horizontally. Let's see. We could put 1 here, maybe. We could put a 1 here, and then we have that one. Maybe these 2 then are going to combine together. I mean, we can reuse tricks in a new setting, or we could have new tricks, or we can have the same tricks, and all of these will take the solver on a different journey depending on what we want to do. If we want to be artful and we want to have a certain a plan to create something spectacular, we can do that. But we can also just make something flowy and simple and fast that is easy to solve and players can get through quickly. It all depends on what we're feeling like or what we want to do. Let's see. So that was the most recent one that I put in. I want that to force something. I haven't really decided what. We could try... something that can be interesting is to create, let's see here. Well, let's just try putting a 2 here and blocking off a few things, maybe. So that will, well, do we want to have this so open? I guess that's okay. We'll force a few of these like that, and then maybe we can put one like that. We could even put a 0 here, which will then mean we cannot put 1 there. Something that's interesting sometimes is to have a long row where you can't put light bulbs anywhere on them. For example, say I put a 0 here, and then, let's see, we can block this off. We don't need that. But then the 0 will rule out all of these. And then if you look at this, the only place this can be illuminated is by placing a light bulb here. Boom. And the only way this cell can be illuminated is by placing a light bulb in that cell itself. Boom. Maybe we can do this one more time. If we put a 0 here, then that will rule out this. And then the only way that cell can be illuminated is by putting a light bulb here. Whoops. Boom. Okay. How's that working? Pretty good. I didn't need this for anything. Maybe I want this light bulb to infer something in the middle. I'm trying to think of a good way to do that. Did we need that? Maybe we could just have a 2 here, and then we will have to put 2 light bulbs there, and then maybe this is where the final light bulb goes to illuminate that one. And we can check our answer. Now, we erased and re-added a bunch of things, so we really should check our whole solution in order to confirm that the logic flow is intact. And the way to do that is erase our answer and do a complete test solve. So let's just pretend we're solving the puzzle. I would do all this. Is there anything I can deduce right now? There actually is. I can put a light bulb here because I know that this cell has to be illuminated and nothing else can light it up. Does that spoil the aesthetic of my puzzle going all the way around? Well, maybe. I might decide to fix this, or I might decide I just don't care. That's fine. But the intended first step was here. And then we can get this light bulb. Sometimes it's interesting to think, like, what if the player doesn't see this move? Like, what if the solver just has to go somewhere else? Can they make progress elsewhere? Like, you might notice that you can't put 2 here because that would violate the 1. And we need sort of 2 of these 3 to be lit up. And therefore, this one, if it wasn't lit up, would force this, which would be a contradiction. And so this one has to be lit up. Does that help me move forward? I'm not sure. I think I still need to know which one of these 2 it is. And so that would allow me to make that discovery. And then so we get that, we get that. We said that would give us this, which would give us this. And then this 2 gives us that. That 1 gives us those 2, which gives us that, which then gives us this to sort of force that, which then gives us this to force that, and that's sort of just an add-on. Then those 2, which finally reveal where that final light bulb in this row has to go, which is there. So most of our solution path is intact. There's maybe a few places where we could skip ahead a little bit. Do we want to go back and fix it? We could if we were really trying to go for a specific look or a specific theme. But the point is you have a lot of freedom as a puzzle designer to create that, and this method of designing from the front or forward design allows you to really have quite tight control over the solution experience of the person solving the puzzle. If you do it correctly and if you're good at it, which is hard, right? Like, I've been doing this for many years, so I have some experience with this, and I have a sense of like where it could go wrong or what types of assumptions I should and shouldn't make when I'm making these sort of, when I'm adding a new square to the grid. How is this going to affect the solution path based on what I've created so far? And you have to have a good sense of how these puzzles solve in order to be able to do that. So some of the best composers of these puzzles are also the best solvers of them, because they themselves are able to, once they place one thing in the grid, they can deduce exactly all that can be deduced from it, and therefore have a really good understanding of what the solver experience is going to be. With logic puzzles, that's true, although it's less true with other types of puzzles like crosswords. I think there's a famous Mike Selinker quote where he says, making a good crossword versus solving a crossword is like arson versus firefighting. And it's not necessary that the same person is going to be, it's not necessarily true that the same person is going to be good at both arson and firefighting. But with logic puzzles, I think it often is. Anyways, I'm going to close this. Don't need to save it. So designing from the front has a number of benefits. You can control the flow, you can create these playful setups, and you can hide eureka moments in really interesting ways. Another thing that designing from the front enables is this sort of deductive solution, where as a solver, you're making logical deductions. You're never guessing, right? Like when you solve a Sudoku, you generally aren't guessing. You're putting in a number once you're confident that that's true. And that means that once you get to the end and you found a unique solution, you're sort of aware that it is unique, because in solving the puzzle deductively, you have established that uniqueness. And this can be a source of pleasure as a solver, because it's sort of like the soundness and completeness meeting together, implying that both the existence and uniqueness of the puzzle have been established. And that's different than a puzzle where you guess and you find the answer and you don't even know, is this the unique answer? Is this the only answer? This definitively is the unique answer, and you had to find it by sort of going through the motions that were intended for you to go through. And that is what enables this communication, because you know that this is what the puzzle designer intended you to do when you're solving it, and you're consciously aware of that, and the puzzle designer is surprising you with what the next step is and how it's been laid out, and not just with the, you know, what the actual solution is. The surprising thing at the end of the puzzle isn't what the final grid looks like when it's done. It's what was the logic that enabled you to deduce that that was the only way it could be. And that is the thing that elevates these types of logic puzzles to a greater aesthetic than a computer-generated Sudoku. One of the important things to do is make the key move, or sort of the key step that you have to do, provably unique. If we go back to that chess puzzle by Sam Lloyd, King E2 is the only way to achieve that mate in 3. And the fact that that's true kind of forces the puzzle... The puzzle forces the solver to uncover the planned eureka moment that has been set up. And in chess, you know, sometimes there's different responses. Like if the player goes King E2, the opponent playing black does not have to respond by queening the pawn. The opponent can respond by just moving a bishop or doing something else, right? And in all of those cases, the player does have mate in 3. But the most interesting part of the puzzle is sort of, what do you do against the most challenging response? And so the fact that there's one key move on the first move is essential in all chess puzzles. It's sort of a requirement of the genre. There needs to be a single unique key move on turn 1. But then often in subsequent turns, it can sort of fork and branch a little bit more depending on what the opponent does. And it's not, you know, you need to kind of find a response to everything, right? So the fact that the later part of the puzzle may not be unique because of what the opponent can do doesn't spoil the aesthetics of the puzzle having a unique key move. Puzzles that lack a unique key move are often called cooked puzzles, meaning, you know, as in his goose is cooked. It's just like not a good puzzle, or it's not worthy of being printed. A second solution is often called a duel, or in video games, I've heard it called an exploit, where the player can get around the intended thing that the developer was trying to force them to do, but the player is somehow able to find an exploit to avoid doing this. And if the purpose of your puzzle is to conceal a unique eureka moment, then intentionally having multiple solutions is not a good idea, and accidentally having multiple solutions may be a problem that, you know, you want your QA to catch. If you're doing puzzle design, you want to make sure that your test solvers are really good at finding those multiple solutions, and the way you want them to do that is by being deductive solvers that can really try and establish the uniqueness of every solution by proving it. And that's hard for some types of puzzles, especially very stateful puzzles like block pushing puzzles, where there's a million different states that the puzzle can be in, and it's often very hard to determine that an alternative way of solving the puzzle is impossible. You really want to, as a puzzle designer, make sure you're slicing off those rabbit trails and just making it so that you don't have to check too deep in order to make sure that something doesn't happen. I can give you a million examples of these, which I didn't include in the talk. I think the one that sticks with me the most is in Steven's Sausage Roll. They have this level called the Tower, where there's 8 sausages stacked up, and you have to sort of set them up in this unique way. But the way I solved that puzzle was not the intended way. And the way a number of people solved it, I've checked on YouTube and Twitch videos, was really not the intended way. I mean, they ultimately got to the same final state, but the sort of setup, or the way they went about going about the setup to get there, can vary in a lot of ways, and some of the setups are really convoluted. Like the thing that I did was kind of really complex and annoying and difficult to set up and painful, whereas there was a nice intended solution to the puzzle, but I never even saw it during my first playthrough. I basically had to cheat and look up the answer before I learned what the intended solution was. I think my experience playing that game would have been a lot better if I had been coerced toward the intended solution more strongly. Like deductive puzzles kind of need to have unique solutions, because the flow demands that you sort of prove every step. You're not guessing, right? So you need to be able to prove every step that you move forward on, and therefore you have to just end up with one solution at the end. You wouldn't be able to have deductive flow if the solution wasn't unique. So many types of puzzles, chess puzzles, logic puzzles, etc., demand solutions, but many other types of puzzles ought to have unique solutions because of the aesthetics and because of the need to have a unique eureka moment and to force that on the player. Unique solutions are just a way to facilitate that. So I advocate uniqueness whenever somebody asks me. And for those point and click adventure games that have multiple solutions to some puzzles, that can be okay. Like there are many downsides, right? Like you're doing extra work that the player might not even see. Sometimes you'll end up with an extra item and not even know what it was for. Like oh, that was for the second possible solution to that puzzle and you never used it. Like you want to have this feeling of every item in the game having had a purpose, right? Like I got that thing, what was it for? If you leave the game without feeling that you understood that purpose, then sometimes it can feel a little incomplete, or it feels like, the communication was lost at some point. So there's a lot to think about with regards to uniqueness. Moving on, let's talk about themes. Adding a theme to puzzles can bring value in many different ways. One example that I will give are Burr puzzles, or Kumiki puzzles. Kumiki puzzles are Japanese animal-themed Burr puzzles. I have one right here. This is sort of themed as a pig. I can show you too. It's a cool puzzle. It's cute. It's not particularly difficult, but it has this move where you have to press the nose in, and then that's what's required to sort of get out the first piece. You press the nose in, and it's just kind of quaint and clever, as opposed to just a regular old Burr puzzle, which is just a bunch of wooden sticks that you have to notch together. There's something a little bit more, and it can also help you kind of remember what you're doing. Like when you have the pieces laid out on the table and you're trying to put this thing back together, you realize, well, okay, that's the ears, that's the legs, that's the language of where things go and how things fit together can somehow be easier if the theme is there. I'll show you a couple of other examples. These are Slitherlinks. On the left is one by Serkan Yürekli, and this was done for the Indian National Puzzle Championship maybe like 6-7 years ago. It's done in the theme of, I'm not sure if it's a lily pad or a lotus flower or some kind of elaborate geometric design. But that design actually makes the Slitherlink puzzle more interesting. Like there is a vertex of degree 17 in the middle of this puzzle, which you never see in a normal Slitherlink with square geometry. And sort of these two twos over here and the way they relate to this high degree vertex in the middle, that's actually the break into this puzzle. The essential part of the solution is to kind of work out how that might function. And so it's not just aesthetic for the sake of aesthetics. It also lends itself to the solution of the puzzle, which is amazing. The one on the right is a Slitherlink puzzle where the 0, 1, 2, and 3 numbers have been replaced by the 4 letters M-O-A-Y in some order. And figuring out that order is part of the puzzle. And this was also published on Mother's Day on Grandmaster Puzzles, and it has the words mama, mama, mommy, in a bunch of corners of the grid. Mama is there. Like it's just kind of cute and clever and interesting, but it's also a valid Slitherlink. And it just adds some little bit of extra sparkle or spice to this puzzle. Another benefit is, like, when you're creating these puzzles, sometimes it's like a blank page. You don't know what to do, what you want to create. And coming up with a good theme can lead you in the direction of concretizing your ideas and having some kind of, key thing to frame your puzzle around. Like, themes allow you to have a purpose to your puzzle beyond just, make one more of the same type of logic puzzle or crossword puzzle or, wood puzzle, whatever it is you're making. So you get this additional aesthetic value, but it's also useful as a constructor to be able to have them. It also makes the puzzles more memorable because, everybody knows, that like 17 degree Slitherlink or that Mother's Day puzzle, right? It gives a short description to the puzzle and allows it to have a place in your brain where it sort of sticks out. The converse to that is don't be clever in ways that the solver will never notice. There are some themes that people think of as an idea for a crossword that maybe make the crossword worse. Here's a crossword. It's actually quite a remarkable construction. It is a quintuple pangram, meaning every letter of the alphabet from A to Z has been used 5 times in this grid. So you will notice there are 5 Q's in the grid, there are 5 X's, and there are 5 Z's. and 5 J's and so on. Like, so really, the constructor here had to get in a lot of interesting words. You can see, like, so 5 Qs means there are 10 Q words in this crossword because they are both across and down. So, you know, there's barbecue and square feet and quirk and quack and quintuple and quick and down quark, Q-tip, right? So a lot of interesting and flavorful Q words, but there's also some words that are kind of not that great that you wouldn't want in a crossword. There's DXIX, for example. Like, what is that? I will show you in a moment. I'll share this quote with you, which is from the late Nancy Solomon, who passed away just a couple of months ago. She is a godmother to all crossword creators with her famous Sage Advice blog. You know, she shares that a plethora of X's, Z's, Q's, and J's and the like will buy you nothing but rejections if you pay too high a price for them. And so here's a couple of examples. One clue is Albuquerque's home, and the answer is NMEX. Like, it's supposed to be the state of New Mexico, but who writes NMEX for New Mexico? Like, you might write NM. This is kind of a weird abbreviation that feels kind of off and wrong, and is that really the answer you want in your crossword? You know, the DXIX is 519 in Old Rome. It is a Roman numeral clue. And let me tell you that the number of times you've seen these, if you've been doing crosswords long enough, it always elicits a groan, and it's always like, well, I guess if you really had to, but like putting numbers in a crossword grid is kind of, you know, once you've seen it once, you've seen it. And like the point is, you're paying sort of in the sparkle and the liveliness of the clues and the quality of the fill in order to achieve this goal of a quintuple pangram. So the question is, like, you know, what are you willing to do for your art, right? And are you making this as something that is designed to be pleasurable for the solver, or are you making this as a work of art? Maybe if you're making this as a work of art, then it's worth it. But if your goal is to make it as something that's pleasurable for the solver, then you got to be a little bit careful. This puzzle is by David C. Duncan Decker, and it is a remarkable puzzle. And I think that as far as a quintuple pangram goes, it's not that bad. Like, there's actually some good words in here. It's mostly lively fill. There's not too many like really tenuous ones, but there are some, and it's just unavoidable when you're trying to achieve a goal this lofty. I can think of all the puzzles that I've like wasted hours and hours trying to finish. It was because I was trying to achieve some kind of aesthetic goal that was just not cooperating, and I tried one thing and it didn't work, tried another thing, didn't work, and constantly having to back out. And a lesson hard learned is to not make your goals too difficult, and especially not to compromise on the quality of the puzzle in order to achieve them. I will show you one more example. This is the cast elk puzzle. Where is it? I had it on my desk at some point. Is it on my shelf? It's hiding. My desk has a lot of stuff on it. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Here we go. So this is a puzzle called the Cast Elk. It's published by Hanayama. It's actually a really cool puzzle. So there's these two, they're basically interlocked semicircular sort of C-shaped rings that are themed like a deer with antlers, or an elk, I guess, you know, is what it's called. And you kind of have to slip them past each other and then sort of like rotate them sideways a bit, and then they come apart. And you can reverse that to push them back together. The thing that's interesting about these is that, well, my spouse Alyssa had this as a teenager, and she was able to solve the puzzle, but she never actually noticed the trick. And the trick is that when you have these two things together, and you try to slip, when you try to do this move, it actually most of the time will not work. And it's because these sort of tips of the antlers are not all the same length. There are two antler tips in this that are shorter than all of the rest. And when you have this interlocked C shape, there's four kind of ways of taking it apart that seem like they're isometric, but they're actually not, because the antlers are not the same length. So my spouse spent her teenage years not realizing why sometimes she could solve this puzzle and sometimes not. And when you go to put it back together, it's even worse, because there's actually 8 possible ways of putting it together, only one of which works. And so it's kind of like a cruel joke played by the puzzle designer. And if you're in on it, it's great. Once you know the secret, it seems clever. But when you're solving it, it just seems kind of like a bit baffling. And it can leave you with this feeling of like not really understanding what the intent of the puzzle designer was. And so I think the lesson is that it would be great if after you solved this puzzle, you could sort of open a fortune cookie and learn, by the way, the secret is this. Because understanding that secret is sort of having the eureka moment. And if you solve the puzzle without having a eureka moment, then part of the aesthetic value of that puzzle is lost on you. And I can't count the number of times where I've watched somebody solve a video game puzzle and they accidentally find the solution and move on, and they're sort of missing out on the beauty that lies within that puzzle because they haven't discovered the deeper secret lying within. And I mean, many video game puzzles simply do not have a deeper secret lying within. But when they do, I think, my goal is always to allow the player to experience that deeper secret, to let them in on the joke, to sort of maximize their exposure to the eureka moment, even if it means telling them afterwards what is the thing that they were supposed to have figured out. Because to me, experiencing the eureka moment is the important part of the puzzle. Now, maybe you want to leave that secret in there. Maybe you want it to be something that somebody can come back to. Maybe you want it to be, a book that when you read it the second time, you learn a little bit more. There's a little bit of depth that you can uncover in the second reading, right? That could be an option too, but it's just something to think about. And that's the end of this example, I guess. Next lesson is the format changes everything. I want to show you a few examples of puzzles that are almost all the same. These are all puzzles where you have to draw a path that sort of goes through everything on the grid. And so on this left, this is a puzzle called Simple Loop. It's a paper-based logic puzzle. You have to draw a loop that passes through every tile exactly once, not including the shaded ones. This one on the bottom left is from a game called Blossom Tales, and it's sort of the same puzzle, except there's an entrance at the top and an exit at the bottom. This one in the middle is from The Witness, and it's the same, except there's an entrance and an exit, and you only have to collect all the dots. You don't actually have to visit sort of every vertex of the grid. This one on the right has multiple entrances and exits, and you may not know where they are. This is from a mobile puzzle game called Alcazar. And it seems like they're all similar, but there's actually a lot of differences in the solver experience when you're solving these puzzles. The modality of your input and the output that you're being shown, right? Whether you're seeing a screen or seeing something physically in front of you or doing something on paper, whether you're using even controller versus keyboard, mouse versus touch, they all provide different affordances. Like, can you click and drag? Do you have to move a cursor around to select which square you're on? Are you on a small screen or a big screen? How big is the text of your puzzle? Can you undo and restart? Can you save your progress? On paper, you have to literally use an eraser, but you can also use multiple colors of pencils to maybe make a guess and try something out, and then you know what you want to erase when you're done making that guess and have decided that's not the way forward. Some video games have undo systems where you can make a move and go back. Some don't. Some are brutal. Blossom Tales, actually, if you step off the path onto those red zones, you take damage and you have to restart. And there's no undo, meaning that if you don't solve the puzzle correctly on the first try, you actually are hurt. When I got to this puzzle, I literally just print screened it and turned it into MS Paint and solved it in there. Punishment of mistakes is sort of an interesting aspect. Like some puzzle games, if you go back to the early 90s Chips Challenge style puzzly adventure games, which had some real-time and some turn-based elements, many of those games were very punishing. Like if you stepped the wrong way, you'd have to completely restart the whole level, you'd lose a life. It was very frustrating. Nowadays, I think fewer games have that aesthetic, and they're more they're more about solving the puzzles, about the eureka moments, and they allow undo and reset, and you can often even undo your reset, which can be useful if you hit it by mistake. Another big one is note-taking, and we'll get to this in the next section, but essentially what I mean by note-taking is, in The Witness, you just have to draw a line from the start to the end. You can't sort of draw a partial line on the corner of the grid, whereas in Alcazar, the way you're making progress is by sort of adding little bits of lines slowly until you've drawn in the whole path. And the experience of solving those two puzzles is very different. Note-taking can increase depth, and this is, an important enough lesson to be a number of its own. I want to show you an example in Sudoku, and then we will go back to the path drawing puzzles. A lot of players have had different ways of doing Sudoku notation, but there's sort of three that are most in common use. And many Sudoku solvers are using all three of these notations at once. There's sort of candidate notation, meaning this cell must contain one of these numbers. 7, 2 means this cell is either a 7 or a 2. Snyder notation is sort of the reverse. It's this number goes in one of these cells. Like here's a box, the 2 in this box goes in one of these cells. And sometimes you'd sort of draw a 2 on the border between two boxes. It's sometimes called a by value. There's different ways that people do it and annotate it. And then there are colors, which means these two cells are the same number, but I don't know which one they are yet. And this is an example from Cracking the Cryptic, where here Mark Goodlife is filling out this grid and hasn't put in a single number yet, or he's just put in his first number, which is a 7 over here in this thermometer. And it took him 30 minutes to get this far, but after he put in that 7, he was then able to finish the whole puzzle in less than a minute, because as soon as you get one number, the whole thing collapses. But this type of puzzle would not be solvable without note-taking. Like you can't solve it the way you would a normal Sudoku, where you're just putting in one number, then the next, then the next, then the next, then the next. You need to be able to take notes and sort of reduce the possibility space down from this large, so many things could be the answer, down to only these things could be the answer. And then from there, you realize, this number has to go there. And so the eureka moments that are possible with note-taking are much deeper than those without it. Let's go back to the witness. This is an example from, it's very early in the game, in fact, that you see this puzzle, and there's multiple start locations, multiple places where you could possibly end it. The goal is basically you have to draw a single line from one of those start locations to an end location that both passes through all these black hexagons, as well as, it has to cut the light and dark cells so that they don't live in the same connected component. And there's a long definition of what that really is, but it sort of is like keeping all the light cells on the left and dark cells on the right, or vice versa. It's similar to that. And if you sort of take this puzzle into MS Paint, you could kind of draw in some little bits of deductive analysis of where the path must go. And from here, you can actually solve the puzzle pretty easily. But that's sort of not really the way this puzzle is designed, right? It's not a puzzle where you can enter partial bits of progress while playing it. It's a puzzle game where you sort of start at the beginning and then draw a line out, and it goes through everything and exits. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does limit the complexity of the types of puzzles that you could create in the Witness. Like if you go back to this Alcazar puzzle on the right-hand side here, you could never make this in the Witness, because it would just be too frustrating for players. Like they would literally need to print screen it and go into Paint, because you can't necessarily solve it start to end without making a mistake. It's just sort of too much for the player's working memory to be able to do that in their head, right? It's too big of a grid for you to be able to head solve. And so the Witness fundamentally limits itself to smaller grids, because it wants to have grids that people can head solve rather than grids that people are going to need to take a million notes for. But that sort of limits how deep and interesting those puzzles can be. Now, that said, taking notes isn't necessarily a good fit for the theme of The Witness. The Witness is fundamentally a game about drawing a line from one place to the next, and not a game about note-taking when you're solving logic puzzles. So I think The Witness's approach is correct for what The Witness is trying to do. But I'm just saying it does create some limitation in what types of puzzles can be expressed, or can be expressed in a way that's convenient for the solver to access without copy-pasting the puzzle into MS Paint, or taking notes on paper, or trying to keep way too many things in their head at once. Some puzzles are basically designed such that note-taking is the solution to the puzzle. Minesweeper is one of them. If you try solving Minesweeper without noting the mines, it's really hard. But also, even just noting where the numbers are, that is the form of progress of the puzzle. Like, note-taking is progress. It feels like progress. For these types of zebra crossing or Einstein's riddle type puzzles, where they give you a bunch of sort of logical hints, and then you have to fill in the grid, like, who had the milk, who had the water, who was what color, etc. Those types of puzzles, the note-taking is the progress. It's what you're doing when you're solving the puzzle. And this is often true of many types of logic puzzles and paper logic puzzles. And it is a tradition that isn't used as much in video game puzzles that sort of rely more on statefulness and interaction. Because this is a natural fit to pen and paper. It's less of a natural fit when you're playing a game and moving a character around in three-dimensional space. But they do a good job of making note-taking feel like progress, and that's how they're able to access their depth in a way that isn't too annoying. Related to that, beware of the temptations offered by the interactive medium. There are certain things that players are often, that puzzle creators in video games are often tempted to put in their puzzles that, especially sort of novice puzzle designers in video games, would possibly be advised to avoid. And I say this with a lot of deliberate nuance. But one example is physics. If you have Unity or Unreal or whatever, there's physics in the game. It's very tempting to just use those built-in physics systems as ways to create puzzles. You have rolling balls, you have cubes that move under gravity, can place on buttons or be placed to jump on, etc. The problem is that puzzles are often about eureka moments that are sort of about discrete state spaces. What is necessary in order to get here or to do this? And physics lives in a continuous space. And sometimes it's just not as nice to reason about a continuous space as a discrete one. If you're trying to aim a thing to see if, the ball can get over there, sometimes it's not clear, can the ball make it over there or can it not? Did I just aim it wrong? I need to aim a little higher or move a little closer, or is it fundamentally impossible? And sort of the projection from that continuous space down to that discrete space removes the clarity of the solver when they're trying to analyze the puzzle and what to do. And if your goal is to make a clear game that presents its uniqueness moments with as clear state as possible, then physics can be a thing that makes that harder. Another thing that can make it harder is statefulness. The paper-based puzzles, they're stateless in the sense that there aren't things moving around. There's not blocks that you can push. They are just, provide the answer to this puzzle. They are puzzles where you have to supply a certificate that obeys certain mathematical rules. Whereas if you have a block-pushing puzzle like Sokoban, that puzzle can be in a lot of different states depending on where the boxes are, and it's often very difficult to reason about what can and cannot be done or what is and is not possible because of the complexity of that state space. Statefulness can make it harder to understand that this eureka moment was necessary or that I had to move through this bottleneck because it just seems like there are so many things to try. And achieving the sort of clarity of a puzzle with a unique eureka moment is much harder when the state space of your puzzle is exponentially large because you have 10 different boxes, all of which can be moved around. Linearity I already mentioned, and plot-driven puzzle games fits into there because you often have the urge to make them linear. If your puzzles come in a linear sequence where one depends on the previous and depends on the previous, game designers tend to gravitate towards this because they like the idea of one idea building upon an old one and building upon another one and getting more interesting and more complex. It's used in a lot of different types of game design. The problem when doing that with puzzles is, again, blocking player progress. If the player gets stuck and they can't advance, then they may not have anything else to do other than look up the solution. Having to sand off the difficulty or the challenges or the interestingness of your puzzles in order to preserve player flow through the linearity, that can be a tough decision to make because maybe that precious eureka moment that you wanted to have is not going to be as impactful because you've had to stick it in a puzzle where it's just spoon-fed to the player. Maybe that's the design you're going for, and that's fine. Maybe you're going for a low difficulty game. But if you're trying to make challenging puzzles, I would really strongly advise you not to make a linear game and look towards Talos Principle, The Witness, Antechamber. So I think many of the most successful puzzle games of the last decade were non-linear in their structure of the sort of prerequisite chain of puzzles. And it's something to look towards. Now, the problem with this advice is this advice has been violated by the most successful puzzle game of 10 years ago. And so many puzzle game developers I've seen hop onto these trends. They try to make a Portal-like. They make a linear puzzle game based on physics and statefulness, and they have a unique narrative beat that's sort of delivered every time you go into the next room, and you have to solve one puzzle after another. The problem is, if you're not Valve and you don't have Valve-level resources developing your game, then you may find it difficult to control the experience in a way that makes players always eager to press on. Like, you're either going to have something that's too difficult, in which case players will become discouraged, they'll look up the answer, they won't have that experience of finding the eureka moments for themselves, or the puzzle will be so devoid of interest or challenge because you've sanded off all the difficulty. You know, Portal 2, I think, sometimes feels like it's focus tested to a fault. Every time a player must have got stuck on a puzzle, they added a light in a corner or an arrow pointing to this part of the room, or a GLaDOS or other character bark, where the character kind of tells you what to look at and what to look for. And some players find this insulting, or they find it kind of spoiling the experience they want out of the puzzle game, right? But those concessions are necessary when you're making a long linear story-based puzzle game of that complexity. So again, be aware of the trade-offs, but I would strongly advise people not to copy Portal 2 if they're not Valve and, are less confident in what they're doing. Non-linearity solves a lot of problems. And even if you want to do a story-driven game, you can still have story-driven beats in a non-linear game. You just have to be a bit more creative about how you deliver those beats. There's lots of games that have done that and done it well. Next lesson, break the rules, sometimes perversely. So I think a lot of puzzles are memorable because they broke one of the rules that I have mentioned previously in this talk. I'll show you a few examples. This is the Clinton Bob Dole crossword, very famous, from 1996. This was literally on election day. And this puzzle does not have a unique answer. There are two possible answers for 39 across. They are Clinton and Bob Dole. And, I think the clue for 39 across was with 43 across, tomorrow's newspaper headline. And so 39 plus 43 across is either Clinton elected or Bob Dole elected. And then they had two other cute clues. One at 17 across was, what this puzzle is making, or something like that, prognostication. And 68 across is Mr. President. It's kind of cute. But how did they do this? Well, all of the down clues that cross Clinton and Bob Dole have to have two answers that work for both of them. And so down here, 39 down, you get cat. Down here, 39 down, you get bat. And the clue was black Halloween animal, which has both cat and bat as answers. These are called Schrodinger clues. Another example is French 101 word is either Louis or oui. A sewing shop purchase is either yarn or yard. Boast or blast, I think, was trumpet. And so there's a lot of cleverness in designing clues that work with two possible answers that themselves are one letter apart, where the one letter is the difference between Clinton and Bob Dole. Like, this is a work of art. This is spectacular. Just a wonderful and exciting puzzle that, through violating the rule of have a unique answer, becomes something even more. I'll show you another puzzle. This is called X-Ray Fish. It's from the Galactic Puzzle Hunt from 2017. I believe if I click this, it will actually show it to you. This puzzle is a video. Is it going to play? I don't know if it's actually going to play. I was hoping it would. I tested this. Okay, there we go. Okay, there it is. And it has music, right? Like, this thing is kind of crazy. So it's got all of these different fish in it that are moving around. It turns out that the thing you had to do to solve this puzzle was count the number of each types of fish and figure out what they all were, and then the numbers were sort of indices into words, which then made a secret message. It was crazy. Except there was one fish that you were not supposed to count, and those were the red herrings, which were intentional red herrings in the puzzle. But the fact that they themselves were red herrings is sort of a joke. It's a bit of humor. It's itself a source of sparkle in the puzzle, right? So the rule of don't put red herrings in your puzzle is somehow flipped on its head by deliberately putting red herrings on the puzzle in sort of a cute way. And I've always remembered that because I thought it was funny. I've also seen escape rooms where they literally have like a fish on the wall and it's a giant red herring. At 2021 MIT Mystery Hunt, there was a puzzle that you had to put together made of puzzle pieces, and the answer was a giant red herring. And it turned out that what mattered in that puzzle was whether or not the puzzle pieces went in or went out, whether they were innies or outies. That was actually the information you needed from the puzzle. And so to illustrate that the picture itself wasn't relevant, the picture was made a red herring, somewhat perversely, but it's hilarious. Here's a Slitherlink example. This is one of mine, although the trick is not original to me. It's been seen before. Usually when you have two threes next to each other in a Slitherlink, there's only two possible things that could happen with it. Either they go like this or they go like this. Because there's just nothing else that can work with the two threes. The problem is, when you try to solve it in either one of those two ways, you run into a problem. You sort of start navigating around the board and you just hit a dead end you can't get through. And actually, the solution is this, which, you can only really do this once. You can only do it on a small puzzle. But there it is. For the once in your lifetime, the thing you're doing with two threes in a Slitherlink is not the typical one. Take from that what you will, but again, violating in a perverse manner the sort of rules and conventions of the genre can lead to a bit of excitement or delight. Let me show you one more. This is a chess puzzle by Pal Banco, who is he was a chess grandmaster and also a prolific chess composer, one of the greats. And this is a delightful one. It's from a book called Chess Brain Twisters, which was compiled together by Burt Hochberg, who was, I think he was editor of Chess and Life magazine, or, he basically got exposed to a lot of these different, unique and interesting chess puzzles, and the book has been reprinted under a different title called Outrageous Chess Problems. Or maybe Outrageous Chess Puzzles. I can't remember. This is honestly my favorite puzzle book in the universe. Above all logic puzzle books, everything else. It's a glorious book. And it contains chess puzzles that are so absurd, they're jaw-dropping absurdities. This one right here is a puzzle where the stipulation is both sides must collaborate to not checkmate black. So it's not just white trying not to checkmate, it's both sides collaborating. And so what's going on here? Well, first of all, white has very few moves to make. Like, this knight can move, but if you move it down there, you'll literally put black into checkmate, so you can't do that. This pawn can move, but if you push it forward, guess what? You've checkmated black. You can move this pawn up, and then, the question is, okay, well, what's black going to do? Black can move this pawn down here and queen it, but by queening this pawn, black will put white into check, which white will be forced to block with this knight moving down there, which then puts black into checkmate. So you somehow have to find a sequence of moves that will not result in checkmate. And in fact, this pawn can go all the way up and promote to a queen, which would checkmate, but maybe you want to under-promote to a bishop or a knight. The problem is, if you promote it to a knight, the only place it has to move is here, which checkmates black. If you promote it to a bishop, the only place it has to move is here, which checkmates black. So it's this really unique situation where it seems like no matter what happens, black is heading for a checkmate in 3. And there is a way to stop it. I will leave it to you to find it. But it's a remarkable and hilarious puzzle, not necessarily because of the solution, just because of the construction and the stipulation. And I think this may be a unique stipulation. I've never seen another help not mate. But such a clever and interesting idea that I will always remember. So the last lesson is about serendipity and about how to find unique and interesting constructions for puzzles. And that is that serendipity occurs when you are actively searching for good ideas. One thing that is common is that great puzzles are often discovered, not invented. But you have to be looking out for those discoveries constantly when you're sort of working on puzzles. I will show you one example. This is from our upcoming game, and it was, I would say created, but almost I would say it was discovered by one of our puzzle authors when they were working with a new type of clue that we had just added to the game. And I'll show you what the puzzle is. Basically, let's see if we can open this. The way this puzzle system works is there are sort of different types of clues that can go into it. And you can color the cells in the grid either dark or light colored. But there are a couple of rules. One is that the white cells have to be connected orthogonally, meaning that, if these are light colored cells and we make dark cells like this, then this would disconnect the light colored part of the grid, so that is not allowed. It's similar to some other puzzles like, Nurikabe puzzles, the dark cells all have to be connected. Here, the light cells have to be connected. The other rules are there's certain patterns that you have to avoid. You cannot have 2 dark cells adjacent, and you cannot have 4 light cells adjacent. And then finally, this 1 in a region means exactly 1 cell in that area is darkened. So this one could be dark and then the rest could be light. Or this one could be dark and the rest could be light. And it turns out from just this, there is a unique solution to this puzzle. And I'll show you the start of the solution. And basically, you look at this region and you think, well, okay, let's try putting a dark cell there. And then these all have to be light. Well, because of the no 4 in a row rule, these two then have to be dark. But we said that the dark cells can't be adjacent to one another, so that's impossible. Therefore, that one can't be the dark cell. And similarly, none of these other outer ones on the periphery can be dark. So in fact, the middle one is the dark cell. And then you get a lot of 3 in a rows, so you have to block off all of the possible 4 in a rows. And then you can't have 2 dark cells adjacent to one another, so these ones all have to be light. And then, I mean, the light cells all have to be connected, so this light cell has to move upwards. If this was dark, then this light cell would be disconnected for everything, so that's light. And then this cell here, you know, if there was 4 in a row here, then that would violate the rules, so this cell has to be dark. And then this light area has to escape, so it's got to go out here. And then there's 3 in a row here, so that one has to be dark. And we just keep going. There's 3 in a row here. This puzzle doesn't stop. The logic of how you solve this thing just keeps flowing. And it turns out that from this initial, just, you know, 1 in a square in the corner, there's a unique solution to this puzzle. And it's quite remarkable. And I asked the creator of this, his name is Jeffrey Barden, how he came upon this. And he says, I don't know, I just got lucky. I just found it. I put this one region in because I thought the one region was kind of interesting and was very forcing. And then I realized that you could really get a lot from it. And I found a place to put it where there was just one single unique solution. And that was remarkable. It was amazing. And everybody who test solved this puzzle remarked that, like, this is a fantastic puzzle. This is very exciting. There's another example called the Miracle Sudoku, which was done by Mitchell Lee. You can look it up on YouTube. It's one of the most famous Sudoku puzzles on YouTube. It has only 2 givens, and it has some extra rules. Like, for example, numbers that are a knight's move away from each other cannot be the same. There's some additional extra rules, but using only 2 givens, the whole puzzle can be solved. And the YouTube video, the solver, he's a guy named Simon on Cracking the Cryptic. He can't believe that this thing has a solution. He thinks that somebody's joking with him, that somebody has pranked him. And when he finally realizes that this puzzle actually works, his jaw hits the floor. Fantastic video. Highly encourage you to watch it. But, you know, the question, again, how do you make these discoveries? One thing is to notice your own eureka moments and turn them into puzzles. But another thing is just be actively searching for things that seem like there might be more there than you expect. Another example, Jonathan Blow was talking about this puzzle from The Witness, and somebody asked him, how did you get it to work? And this particular puzzle is quite remarkable. Essentially, you're solving a grid puzzle which simultaneously is making paths on the floor that you can walk on. And you can only edit the blue part of the grid from one side, and you can only edit the orange part of the grid from the other side. And you actually have to physically walk on the path to get to the other side to be able to edit the other one. And you have to go back and forth like 5 times in order to actually get to the final state of this puzzle. But the sort of journey you're taking when doing that is remarkable. And the fact that it works at all seems outlandish, outstanding, like somebody must have been a genius to put this thing together. And no doubt this is a very clever and very beautifully crafted puzzle. But when John was asked how he was able to figure this out, he kind of said, well, you know, I started putting stuff together, and then towards the end he kind of just got a bit lucky. You know, the fact that you had to go back and forth 5 times, the fact that kind of just worked out, you know, he was just able to make it work. And it's kind of difficult sometimes to learn why you were able to make it work. It just turned out that way. And this type of serendipity happens a lot when you're creating puzzles. Sometimes you will just find that you're able to do something a little bit remarkable, or even more remarkable than you thought. Every puzzle creator has had moments in their life or in their career of creating puzzles where, for whatever reason, they were able to obtain an unexpectedly exciting or fantastic result because it just happened to work out. And as a puzzle creator, I think that one of the most important lessons is to be actively looking for these opportunities and seize them. I will give you a quote from Raf Peters, who's I think he's the founder of Smart Games, or he's one of the guys who's created a lot of puzzle for Smart Games. This is one of his puzzles, Penguins on Ice. And in describing this puzzle, he talked about how he came upon the theme for it, why it was sort of these penguins on ice as sort of a pentomino puzzle. And there's a unique mechanic where these pentominoes can slide next to each other. So that polyomino can go from an F pentomino to a P pentomino to a W pentomino, as sort of these two blocks up top slide over here and over here. And this one as well, this block sort of slides up and down, so it could be a Y pentomino or an L pentomino. And, you know, this is the quote. The most important idea is, you don't find good ideas by luck. You find them by actively searching for them and actively trying hard to recognize the potential in the things you discover. Often one small innovation isn't that valuable, but a combination of many small things may produce something that brings your creation to a whole new level. And he was referencing the theme of the puzzle and why he chose to make it penguins and ice. One thing is that the penguins made it clear that there was a top and the bottom, so it made it clear that the puzzles could not be flipped. The sliding allowed the pieces to reach more configurations, which made more possible instances of the puzzle. The way the puzzle works, by the way, is you get a card that shows you where the penguins ultimately have to be in the finished puzzle, and then you have to find a way to slide the ice blocks and build the puzzle so that the penguins lie in the right spots. But like, there's a lot of pentomino puzzles out there, and he wanted to make one that had fewer moving parts so that it was easier to manufacture and less frightening and didn't seem like a really complicated puzzle. He wanted it to look simple and be more elegant, and the sliding added back the interestingness that was lost when the number of puzzles were removed. And sort of the theme made it less abstract and sort of more fun and playful. And by putting all of these things together, he was able to create something that was far more exciting and compelling and interesting than just a pentomino puzzle where you're putting blocks in a grid. And the sort of synergy of the theme with the idea that you can't flip them over, with the playfulness and the sliding of the puzzle, and somehow ice sliding into different configurations feels like it makes sense. It just ends up being more than the sum of its parts. And that idea was a combination of many small things that each in and of themselves wasn't that valuable, but somehow added up to a really great result. And the way he was able to do this, you know, he chalks it all down to just being alert and looking for those things. Trying really hard to recognize the potential in every little possible innovation you might see. And that's something that as a puzzle creator, you're constantly doing for your whole career. You're trying to notice the little eureka moments that you're having when playing around with the parts, and trying to find ways to cultivate more depth from those eureka moments. So that's the end of the talk. This is the sort of summary slide where we show all of the tips or the lessons or the rules. You know, we've been here a while. This is the extended sort of director's cut version of this talk. There's a lot there. You know, if you came from the GDC talk, I know it was a bit rushed. I apologize. It's hard to cram all this stuff into an hour. Here it feels like I've had a bit more room to breathe and more to give a bit more nuance and discussion to the topics. If you like this stuff, I will probably be making more videos on it in the future, although I don't know how soon, because game number 3 is very demanding of my time right now. But yeah, that's sort of the puzzle design GDC talk, or extended version of it. I hope this was useful. I love talking about any and all things puzzle related. Please contact me. I love playing demos of puzzle games or betas or early access games. I love giving feedback on them. So please share them with me, and I would love to share with you my thoughts. If you are a puzzle designer and you are looking for a job in video games, talk to me. I've gotten lots of puzzle designers jobs in video games. I've also hired many of them myself. Either way, talk to me. And yeah, that's the end of the talk. Have a good one.